Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. I'm Ray, What Ray Reads. Follow me on Instagram and follow me on TikTok because why not? First of all, you may be thinking, Rachel, something's a bit different, and that is because, although it is sad to say, the mini microphone has sadly retired. She's moved on. She's in a retirement village called the Recycling Centre. Because unfortunately she stopped fulfilling the desires that I needed. And I'm not one to get rid of a woman when she's past a certain age, but unfortunately I had too many complaints in my last video, so I had to up the game of the microphone. So as you can see, she's got a new one, a good quality one, so the sound better be good or I will scream. But yeah, I'm basically like a full-time diva with this microphone. Oh, Mabel, she just woke herself up.
Oh, you were dreaming.
So today's video is basically an overview in, I've seen people call it the first quarter of the year, the reading quarter of the year. I'm going to go through everything I read in the first quarter of the year, which is January, February and March. The good news is that I'm on top of my reading goal. I'm not behind, I'm not chasing it. Slow down. No, I'm on top of it. So my reading goal for the year is 50, so if I read more, then that's great. But if I read less, it's not the end of the world. But we're on track. I'm also this year really enjoying using the library and using the Libby app and Spotify because I've gotten into my audiobook era, leaning into it, and I'm really enjoying my journey on audiobooks. So yeah, if you're not on Libby, you can get it for free through, Mabel, you can't sit there. You can get it free, it's an app. And you use your library card to get it, and they've got ebooks and audiobooks as well, so get it, why not? But yeah, let's go through some statistics. I also log my reading on, well, I'm on Goodreads, but I'm trying to sort of, wear myself away from that because, Jeffrey Bezos. So I'm on Storygraph and I'm also on Fable. So in total, in the 3 months of January, February and March, I've read 13 books. The total pages that I've read are 3,856, and I'm a slow reader. So my most popular genre, can anyone guess? Have you got any guesses? Any guesses? It's literary fiction. My most read author, it was a shocker to me, and I think it's going to be a shocker to you. It was Fredia McFadden. And you may be thinking, Rachel, isn't she a thriller author? You don't really read thrillers. Well, because I'm in my audiobook era, and sometimes I do like the occasional thriller, and I'd never read her books before. And I got into reading a few of them on audio. I think I've read 3. Sometimes people who I trust, with the bookish tastes, they rate it highly. So I enjoyed the experience of the first one, and sometimes you just want the thrill of it. And the average rating so far is 3.7. So let's just get right into the books. So in January I read 4 books. The first book I read was Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham, and that was on audiobook. I rated this 3 stars. Obviously I wanted to start the year off with something a little bit lighter, and I found this kind of a bit of a slog, to be quite honest with you, and a bit disappointing. But the overview of the story is that it's set in Louisiana and we follow Chloe, a young psychologist who's dealing with the trauma of the fact that a dad was a serial killer. Girls start going missing again, and it seems to be like a copycat of what her dad did. So she's brought back into it, not only as a psychologist, but as the daughter, and things get weird. The things I liked about the book were that it did have quite a mysterious element to it. It did start off character-focused literary mystery, but then halfway through, it started sort of getting a bit loose with the plot. I was just not really buying it. And although I did enjoy the narration, that can make or break for me, the audio narration, there was just something that sort of lacked, and I just felt like it was far-fetched. I sort of guessed what the twist was, so I was kind of checked out about 70% in the book. So yeah, she got 3 stars, and I wouldn't really recommend, to be honest. Then I was obviously back on my sort of thriller mystery journey, shall we say, and I read The Coworker by Fredia McFadden, and that was on audiobook as well. And I will just say, Fredia McFadden books tend to come through with the audio narration. I think they usually cast the narrator very well, and the way they tell it's very engaging and fast-paced, which is what you want for those type of books. So I rated this 3.5. As I mentioned, this was another audio listen, and it's a psychological thriller that follows the disappearance of a unusual, socially awkward office worker who doesn't really fit in, and it's almost implied that she's a bit on the spectrum. Her co-worker has to figure out what's happened after she discovers some weird things that have been happening, but then it's unravelled that she may not have been very nice to Dorn, and she becomes a bit of a suspect. As I said, I thought this was well acted, which made it more engaging. Out of the mysteries, and especially the Fredia McFadden ones, I thought this was the most interesting concept, and I found the twists and turns kind of above average. But the main thing I liked is that I found the central character of this story much more engaging and dynamic and complex than any of the previous characters, because some of the characters in her books are a bit flat and full of character tropes, but I thought Dorn was very realistic, and also I just really felt sorry for her as well. But I will say that we're not just focusing on aesthetics here, but the cover of the book's god awful. Disgusting! It's absolutely jail. A crime, actually. But yeah, some of the aspects were far-fetched and there were tropes at the end, but there were elements in it that were sort of better than average in the genre. I would say if I was going to recommend any of Fredia McFadden books, I'd recommend this one. The next book was The Nickel Boys, which I read. Was that also audio? Yes, so I listened to that on audio and I rated this 5 stars. It was my favourite of the month and I'd wanted to read it for ages, but I just hadn't got around to it. In the book, we follow a young boy who's smart, he's got a promise, he's about to go off to university, but he gets caught up at the wrong place at the wrong time and he gets accused and convicted for a crime he didn't commit, and he's sent to a reform school. And years later, an investigation is underway where it's uncovered that horrific acts of cruelty and abuse happened at the school. And so we go back to the central character who was sent there and his experiences when he was there as a young boy, the connections he made, the experiences that impacted him, the levels of abuse and abuse of power people in positions of power carry out. The characters were rich, they really broke my heart. The writing was very cutting and sharp, and it tackles a time in history in America of extreme race and hatred in the 1960s. And I'm not sure if I'm correct, I'll have to look into it, but I'm sure it's based on an actual reform school. Obviously it's fiction, but it's taken inspiration from a real place. It was very cinematic in the way it was told as well, and it didn't sort of mince words, which I liked. It was just very poignant as well, so I highly recommend. And then the final book I read in January was Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn. I gave this 4 stars. This was the only physical book that I read this month, and this is set in LA. It's a very millennial story, and we follow a writer, Astrid Dahl, who's sort of struggling. She's living a bit of a sort of messy life. She's a bit hedonistic. She's trying to be strict and be a great writer. She wants to write a novel, but she's sort of a mess in a sense. And she's trying to find love in the lesbian community in LA and avoid people that she's already sort of been involved with. In it we meet lots of colourful characters that come and go throughout her life, but it's sharp and witty, it's satirical, and although it deals with some heavy subject matter like addiction, it's told in a very dark, humoured way, so you'll enjoy reading about the mess and the goings on of this character who just seems to sort of constantly put a foot in it. It's definitely more of a vibes over plot type book, but you know, I'm usually seated for those. But I think it works for this as it's a character-centred story. It very much is for the girlies who like My Year of Rest and Relaxation. So if you're into those sort of quite unlikable, complex female narrator, read it. So that month I read a total of 1,282 pages. My favourite book, as I mentioned, was Nickel Boys, and my least favourite was Flicker in the Dark. So in February I read 5 books. I DNF'd 1 though, so really I read 4.5. The first book I read was an audiobook, and that was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I'd seen sort of good and bad things about this, but people told me it was more like a literary mystery, and it's set at a summer camp, and we jump between different time periods where 2 people from the same wealthy, prominent family go missing, and what unravels over the course of the stories, the family secrets, the reality of what happened, and why it's happening again. It was very well paced and the characters were very rich and dynamic. We had quite a lot of characters, which you don't usually get in regular sort of thrillers. This was more complex in that sense. It takes its time and it's not afraid to sort of meander here and there, and it focuses on different periods in time and points of views, so it can get a bit confusing at times, which led me to wish I had read it physically as opposed to listen to it, because I was struggling to follow sometimes because of the amount of jumping around that it does and the different characters' points of view. So I kept having to check, what era are we in again? Like, who's this character? I did really enjoy this. I gave it 4 stars and I didn't really guess the end, and you know the way you sometimes guess it. I didn't really know what was going to happen. It'd make a great like mini series. The next book I read was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, and if you follow me on any of the socials, you know I was singing its praises. This is one of my favourite books. It's going to be one in the top 10, I can tell you that for free. It's a retelling of David Copperfield, and we follow Damon, but his nickname's Demon, a young boy who is born into poverty in rural Virginia, Appalachia, and he's exposed to the harsh realities of poverty, the care system, addiction, grief, loss, just so many hardships, and we see it through the point of view and the eyes of a child, which makes it all the more harrowing, touching and enraging. As I mentioned, it was my favourite of the month. It's a story that's very close to home for me, as some of the things that were touched upon in the book were things that I've dealt with. The fact that he was in foster care, as I've mentioned, I was also in foster care as a child, so that really mirrored a lot of my experiences, and I think Barbara Kingsolver really captured that very well. The character was so sort of fiery and rich. He felt like fully fledged, not made up of tropes. I think you can tell she's done a research and she cares about the character, and it was written with such sympathy and honesty and no judgment. It is a heavy read, so I will say make sure you're emotionally and physically prepared to read it. So yeah, just make sure you're ready. The next book I read was Good Girl by Aria Aber, and I read this because it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, and I want to sort of read all the shortlists. And it's essentially a coming of age story. We follow Neela, a young girl who's growing up in Berlin. She's living a hedonistic life. She's sort of rebelling against her upbringing, and she's being hedonistic and constantly going out in the seedy nightclub scene in Berlin. She wants to be an artist, and she meets sort of characters who are pretentious. She's also sort of caught between two worlds, the world with her strict Afghan parents who want what's best for her and want her to fulfill her potential, but she's also grieving the loss of her mother. She's butting heads with her father, and he's essentially struggling to control her. She's leading 2 different lives. Now on paper you'd think I'd enjoy this because it's a rich, complex female character, but unfortunately the structure of the story really didn't work for me, and halfway through, I think I read like 50%, but there's only so many drug-induced nightclub scenes that I can read before they start sort of blaring together, and it feels like I'm reading the same scene over and over again. We get it.
I'm a party girl with a bad habit for drugs.
Fortunately, it was a DNF and I was very disappointed. Then I read The Message by Ta-Neishi Coates. I rated this 4 stars. I got this from the library, and if you've ever read any of his work before, he writes very beautiful essay-style reflections. I think he has written some fiction, which I haven't yet read. I love his book Between the World and Me, but this is a variety of essays and an exploration and a reflection of history, how his ancestry and history has impacted him as he's grown up, the stories, the traumas and the experiences that are told and retold through generations, through history, passed down, how the world and society sort of tells us myths essentially, and we should really be asking the people who've lived the experiences of how it impacted them. And through the different essays, I think there's 3 or 4 essays, he focuses on colonialism and slavery in Africa, and he goes back to explore his ancestry history and how he's tied to this place that he doesn't feel he knows. Then we have an essay that's focusing on book banning in Southern America and how they're trying to ban his books and the teachers are pushing against it. And the most poignant and heartfelt part of the book is the section on Palestine, where he goes to a writers' festival in Palestine. Essentially, he has his eyes opened to the realities from his experience there, and he can't help but notice the similarities between the way Israel treats Palestinians and the way black people were treated in Jim Crow South. And he's really sort of moved and touched by this experience. You can tell by the way he promotes the book as well that he's been forever changed by it. I just kind of wished it was a little bit longer, to be honest, because I enjoy reading his writing so much. I gave that 4 stars. Then I read The Liars by Sarah Munguson on audio. I gave that 4 stars. This was a book that I sort of noticed and I was like, oh, that seems interesting. And then I just randomly selected it out of my saved books on Spotify, and I wasn't ready for how much I enjoyed it, because when I first started reading it, I was like, oh, these sort of middle class privileged people complaining about the things in their lives. But it's much more than that. It essentially follows a woman who has dreams and ambitions. She's got talent to be a writer. She meets a man, she gets married, she becomes a mother, and slowly her career and her ambitions are slowly getting pushed to the side, and the expectations of her being a caregiver, a mother, the role of domestic goddess, wife, is sort of what she's becoming more known for, and it's becoming a conflict in a marriage, and a husband is leaning into his role of letting her do everything essentially, and it's told over the course of their marriage and how the societal expectations, the daily realities, the struggles, the highs and lows impact their lives, but also their relationship, and how it ultimately changes and how it enrages her and emboldens her, but mostly it frustrates her for what she's expected to sacrifice. You see this a lot, that women are expected to sacrifice things in service of family. Don't see him sacrificing much. This book really took me by surprise. It's very good for her.
Good for her.
In many ways, it reminded me of Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante. That was another book I read last year, and it was very female rage, frustration with domestic setting. I feel like if you've got a child, you need to read it because you'll just be so seen. And we just need to leave these gendered societal expectations in the trash where they belong. And I personally think she should have gone full on Amy from Gone Girl.
You think I'd let him destroy me and end up happier than ever? No fucking way.
So those were the books I read in February. In total, I read 1,517 pages. My favourite was Demon Copperhead. And obviously my least favourite was the book I DNF'd, Good Girl. Now on to March, the final month. The first book I read was Victorian Psycho. This was one that I was really excited for. Got it from the library, and it's a gothic horror set in Victorian times, obviously, and we follow a young, strange woman who goes to work for this rich family, being the governess of their home, their manor, if you will, and it's a very sort of eerie setting. It's not until she gets there that we start to realise that this woman isn't quite right. She's got certain urges and impulses that she's struggling to control. Put it this way, I wouldn't leave my children alone with her. It's unhinged, it's gross. There's quite a lot of gross descriptions, which I was like, reading it, but you really get a sense of what she's like, and she's just sort of a very rich, complex character. I do wish we would have got more backstory, but I think the fact that we don't adds more to the gothic horror mystery, but it's a wild ride, highly recommend. Then the next book I read was another Fredia McFadden, and it was called Never Lie. I rated that 2 stars. I listened on audio and never again. Never lie, never again. The summary of the book's a newlywed couple go look at a house they might buy, and turns out they get snowed in. The realtor's not there. They're left in this posh mansion that they soon discover was once owned by a prominent psychiatrist who mysteriously went missing and hasn't been seen since, and her boyfriend's expected of doing something. So you're hooked in. Stranger things have happened. Although it was sort of gritty gripping and well acted. From quite soon on, it was given unrealistic. It was given plot holes. It was given far-fetched. And it was just not believable. But yeah, 2 stars. Then I read Natural Beauty, a very highly anticipated book by Ling Huang. I've seen so many people that I admire on booktok and bookstagram reading it, and as soon as somebody said it is very similar in certain themes to the substance, I had to get it. So we follow a music prodigy who needs money to look after her parents. So she gets a job. She's essentially like scouted for a job at this like holistic wellness centre spa where they do lots of beauty treatments, the skincare, the Botox. That's how you get Botox. And she sort of starts to unravel the lengths that people will go to and the reality and the secrets behind the scenes of what people will do for youth and wellness, or what they assume is wellness. And she's not prepared for what she discovers. This was a strange book, but the commentary it has on the beauty and wellness industry and the money that that industry makes, profiting off people's insecurities, and also the consumerism that, you know, you need the latest treatment, you need the latest skincare. We're all sort of victims to her as skincare girlies, but the things that we allow in our bodies or on our skin, and we don't really know what it is. Really, we're just told, and this is very much a horror story of what it could be. It's got body horror elements, and I've seen people also relate it to Rouge by Mona Awad, which I've still not read, even though I bought it as soon as it came out, desperate to read it, and it's still sat there. But I really liked the commentary on the current obsession of beauty and wellness and how it plays on people's desperation and insecurities. Really, we need more books and commentary pushing back on these industries, which is why I think The Substance was so good as well. So highly recommend. Then I read May You Have Delicious Meals by Junko Takase. This was rather disappointing. It was an audio book. I rated it 2 stars. Again, it was a short sort of book, and it was a bit of a whim that I decided to read it, more so because it was narrated by an author I really liked, Hanoko Footman, and we follow certain co-workers who work in an office, and the gendered dynamics of society and office culture is explored through the relationships with each other, but also the relationship and the ceremonial aspect of food in people's lives, and how some people nourish the bodies by enriching it with certain foods. Some people will show their appreciation to others with food, but either way, I found it disappointing because it was constantly introducing characters and talking about office dynamics and cultural dynamics, but never really sort of saying anything about it, really, going over the same things. And I understand what it wanted to do was to shine a light on gendered workplace dynamics and cultural aspects, but it just sort of didn't come across. It felt very repetitive, and it was a bit boring as well, sorry. If you want a better book about workplace gendered dynamics, I'd recommend Diary of a Void instead. And then the final book that I read in March was Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa. I rated this 4 stars. This is a book that I got for my birthday. I'd seen a few people say it was unusual and weird, so I was like, 1 copy please. And basically we follow a woman who lives in an assisted living facility. She has a muscle disorder in which she requires a ventilator and a wheelchair, and she requires a lot of help and assistance for her daily living. She lives her life online and finds a sense of self-expression through writing stories and sharing her opinions on social media, and she has a desire to get pregnant, even though she knows that it's not something that her body can handle. And so she starts to look into how she can take this into her own hands. It was such a quirky story, and I'm thinking, yeah, it was quirky, but also maybe it was more unique because we don't get this point of view or hear this voice of characters who have disabilities, or characters who are living in a setting or a community that isn't what we consider normal. Those stories and characters tend to be pushed to the back, and I'm like, bring them to the front. We need more representation. We need more stories of characters who have a different lived experience. And I think it was really special in the way that it did touch on disability and the daily realities, how societal norms and ableisms really sort of made us treat people in a different way. So if you want a unusual whole story like something you've not read before. It's only a short book, but as the girl who was at the till selling me, it said it really packs a punch for those short pages. So in March, I read 1,057 pages. My favourite was Victorian Psycho, obviously, and my least favourite, obviously, it was Never Lie, because what was that? So yeah, that's everything that I read in the first quarter of the year. It's what I've been reading lately. Let me know if you've read any, what you thought, what's been your favourite book this year, and if you've made it this far in the video, let me know some books that you're looking forward to reading. If you're not already, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. It really helps the channel and it helps me. You can support me here. I appreciate you all. I'm loving this little community that we've got going. And as always, take care and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!